Okay, I'd like to call to order the June 26th meeting of the Historic District Commission in the town of South Kingstown. The first order of business is roll call. And let's see, Richard Junkin. Here. Sharon Henderson. Here. And Bettina Monaco. Here. And this is William Gates, the chair. Next order of business is approval of the minutes from April. We've just got a couple of people that have the ability to remember back to April and the HDC meeting. So when have you guys wanted to make a motion to approve? Feel free to do so.
I'll second that. I'm going to move because my mic is not on.
So do we have an initial motion? Rich, you're making a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting.
And do we have a second from Sharon?
I'll second that motion.
Just to be clear, the last meeting minutes are from May, not April?
Yeah, I said May.
Okay, but Murray said...
I did say April, so May it is.
Okay.
So we've got a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approves. Correspondence and public comment.
Just for the board's information, I included a copy of the routine maintenance approval that was issued since the last meeting for the roof at the South County Art Association. Apparently they got into the work that we had previously approved and found evidence of roof leakage. So it's typical roof replacement, asphalt for asphalt, color for color. And we use the standard roof replacement certificate of authority that we've been using that protects all of the exterior moldings and everything like that. So fairly straightforward.
Any questions, comments? Moving right on to old business, discussion of potential stone wall protections. Sharon, to avoid the echo here, can you turn off your speaker? No need to apologize. So we had some, just as a reminder of where we left this, we had some examples of stone wall ordinances that had been passed in several other communities in Rhode Island, and I had offered to do a first attempt at creating a draft ordinance for the town of South Kingstown. I have not gotten to that yet. So if there's any other thoughts that you've had since our last meeting around the stone wall ordinance. If not, we can move on to the next topic. Okay. Hearing none. Discussion regarding the potential coordination with Affordable Housing Committee.
I met with Peter Swain, and we discussed from the Housing Committee, and I discussed with him areas that we could share information that they would be interested in. So I think that may be the next area to pursue, is just be able to provide the Housing Committee with, the Affordable Housing Committee with information about historic buildings that have been rehabbed for affordable housing, how common that is, how prevalent that is in Rhode Island, and what the funding mechanisms have been to allow that to happen in a reasonable way. There was a lot that I learned about the committee, their sort of lack of information about historic preservation and how that works. So I did give him that information. at the meeting. But I think there's a lot more to share. And they're very receptive. So I think down the road, we possibly could have a joint meeting with them. But at this time, it's probably better to just supply information to them through Peter Swain.
Is Peter Swain any relation to Claudia?
Yes, husband.
Oh, husband, okay. And so feeding this information, is that what, how do you plan to do that through him?
Well, I think the first step would be to just provide him with links. There's a lot on the internet, and there are other contact information, staff, people involved at the state and regional level on affordable housing and historic preservation. There's also National Park Service information that is readily available, and there is information about grants and fund seeking that they could do in various ways. The opportunities exist in sort of a realm of areas that they can research and, you know, sort of get the information from themselves, but they need that sort of upfront linkage or networking to sort of get from A to Z.
Right.
So I think that's a role that we can play.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Right. I don't know if there's anybody in the town staff that has any knowledge of any of this. So, you know, they can provide that as well. But I have made the link, so it's just easy for me to send the material. And I can copy the town on what I'm, you know, sending to them. But I'm dealing with one person on the committee, and that's it.
Is there any data that we'd be able to provide or to come up with that would support the potential for affordable housing from historic preservation, whether that be, so I know we've talked in the past about the potential for downtown on Main Street, second floors, third floors. That's been a conversation for a number of decades, whether it's single-family homes that are being expanded to accommodate affordable housing. Where are the areas of potential, and how can we measure what that is? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, if you're speaking about the town of South Kingstown and what potentials exist, I think there's a lot of models that we can transfer from other communities who've done successful programs. And if they've done it in Saratoga Springs or Glens Falls or communities in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, I think it should be an easy transfer of information. The question is, can it be done here? It's likely it can be. There may be obstacles that the Affordable Housing Committee has already uncovered in terms of ownership and attitude and awareness. That would be something that would be nice to share with them, where these other successful programs are. But I've mentioned communities outside of Rhode Island. There are communities within Rhode Island as well that they can easily go and look at and get information from, including public housing authorities that are tapped into historic preservation money. So it seems like a desert. That's what I'm finding in just speaking to him. So why is it a desert? I don't know. I mean, I have 40 years of experience in dealing with historic preservation projects, so I know all this stuff. But it may be that they're not getting any information locally from that, about that. They seem to be eager to find out, which is good. And to answer your question more, Murray, I think that the examples that we come up with probably have statistics that show viability. I mean, they wouldn't be successful award-winning projects without being viable projects. So those sort of embedded in the models are the statistics on why they are successful, I would think.
I'm trying to understand what an example of a project would be. So are we talking about turning existing housing into deed-restricted affordable housing? Or
Well-
is that not necessarily a criteria for calling it affordable housing? Because we've got plenty of historic properties that are acting as affordable housing today.
Yes, well, part of the strategy has been in many of these communities that have successful programs is to retain the existing housing stock that's affordable as affordable housing. And how they do it is through the purchase of easements or other vehicles that enable the property owner to retain value and get value, but also retain the housing, the existing housing, whether it's historic or not, as affordable. There are examples of that. There are also examples of the rehab of historic buildings. This is one thing that I found that wasn't fully understood, that the normal historic preservation project is a rehab. It's not a restoration. It's a rehab of a historic property such that the architectural integrity is retained, but perhaps the interiors are modified or there's substantial modifications or additions added that complement the building, and that's where the affordable aspect comes in. I think that people in this town perhaps have a skewed idea that restoration is what is involved, and that's enormously expensive, and therefore we can't do it. They don't understand, or they don't have the experience to know about rehabs that have taken place in nearby towns, North Kingstown, East Greenwich, Warwick, Cranston, Providence, certainly, of mill buildings, and factory buildings, or surplus commercial buildings, or 20th century gas stations, or whatever, that have been successful, have been award-winning, and have created either flexible commercial space or mixed commercial and housing spaces, or just straight housing that's been crafted as affordable housing. Now, when I say affordable housing, I mean not necessarily low-income housing, but the old definition of affordability, which is to provide housing for workforce or median income families, or families that are within that threshold of being affordable. There are quite a lot of examples as well of low-income housing in historic properties. There are examples of elderly housing that is low-income housing as well, that's is an affordable rehab of a historic building. There are housing authorities that have rehabbed historic buildings and provided community centers and housing as well, and received grants to do so. The nonprofit sector is something that they hadn't really thought very much about, according to what I understood, and that is that grant making is generally directed toward nonprofit organizations, 501c3 organizations and such. So foundation money, private money for affordable housing sort of flows that way, not to public agencies as such, or town-owned things. So I think enough housing, that may be something else that they should be thinking about is, if they aren't already, is how do you generate nonprofits, how do you get nonprofits funding to do affordable housing in historic properties? So I think in terms of this town, there's the opportunity for upper-level housing on Main Street, which is what other Main Streets are doing, historic Main Streets. And Sharon, you probably have some knowledge of that through your Main Street experience. So why it isn't happening here, I think that's another huge question. It may have to do with the property owners. and the use of those upper-level spaces for storage, which seems to be something that the property owners are obsessed with. So, that may be something that has to be fixed.
What, were any of those upper levels ever historically used for housing?
Yes.
So that's part of the,
Yeah.
okay.
Some of those upper levels were apartments, some of them were community spaces. There was a ballroom in one of the buildings, the Bell Block. Fascinating spaces, actually. And some of them are actually used for housing now as apartments. I think that one of the blocks has been elevators and fire code. And why we haven't been involved as a town in, discussing that and seeking solutions to that, I don't know. The historic tax credits and the housing tax credits can be combined. These are the federal credits. They, to my knowledge, haven't been used at all. And the state credit was never used, in my knowledge. So there's a whole lack of information about any of these programs that could be used or implemented. So it's kind of a desert. And I think they're trying to work their way out of the desert, but I think it's hard.
Another question, I was thinking about this. All the mills, they provided the housing for the workers, correct? They had mill houses. Everybody lived in a mill house. So the industry provided the housing, or the industry is not providing the housing now.
Yes, that's another great question. And there are communities that have zoning or other regulations requiring, in Rhode Island, that require the commercial entities. I think there are some grandfathered entities that may drop out of this, but new entities coming along that are related to, large workforce to provide housing for that workforce. Block Island has that kind of ordinance. I'm not sure about Westerly, but I think it's been contemplated there. And, this is a major burden. I mean, we hear about enterprises that have 300 employees. I think I've heard of one of those recently that suffered a catastrophe. Where do all those people live? And what are the obligations for that? I know in Westerly, the Ocean House created a stir because of the number of employees that were being brought in, and some of them seasonal, obviously, right? And where were they going to stay? And there was an effort to, and I think it's ongoing, to provide that housing by the establishment, the owner of the business. And so motels were rehabbed, some commercial spaces were rehabbed, some housing was gained that way to provide that seasonal housing. I'm aware of that happening in Newport as well for large employers and employee staff that's seasonal. So sometimes these are mandated by communities, and sometimes they're, the responsibility is taken up by the owner because it's, good for them. It's not just good for the town. Any owner who has that obligation is going to want to, hopefully, house his workers in a good way. If you can't find housing for the workers, that really works not to his advantage, right? So I think that Block Island may be a great example of how that gets codified in Rhode Island as an obligation.
The burden of this has fallen on the town. As far as, I think that's what, I hear the affordable, we got, everything is, where in the past it fell on the industry.
Well, the industry that we had, yes, they were farsighted in Peacedale, the Hazard family, and they provided model housing for the workers. Those workers got the very best housing that was available at the time. In fact, we have in Peacedale, in the district, the Peacedale district, these really model cottages. They're everywhere. that are L-shaped cottages for families. And they've been preserved in many ways, and they are ubiquitous. They're all over Peacedale, and I think they're fond, people are very fond of them. They have porches, they have kitchen Ls, they are nice dwelling units. The Hazards wanted to have a unit that spoke of community. And so they were not really into building boarding houses, although boarding houses were built.
They really were, and like my relatives, I'm an immigrant from 1910 to 1875 when my family came into Westerly, French Canadian and German, and they came down through Massachusetts. They were illegal, by the way, they didn't have the paperwork, and my grandmother was German. However, most of my grandparents were born in mill houses in Westerly, in Kenyon,
Yeah.
and they lived in mill houses. Well, no, they bought here, so that 1910 is about when they came. But what I'm learning is all these mill houses around here, around Wakefield, and they've moved some of them, but they all lived in those mill houses. Everything wasn't an L-shaped cottage.
Right.
So it was huge numbers of people. What was Patty Hill?
Patty Hill was built later in the Enterprise, the Peacedale Enterprise, and those are townhouses. And they were designed by a Providence architect. They were model at the time. There's several of them on Kersey Road as well. But can you think about a two-level townhouse that was duplex or threeplex or fourplex, but no bigger than that? They had a lot of dignity in those houses, and I think families were raised in those houses. And so they still have a lot of viability today
Oh, yeah.
as great dwelling units and affordable dwelling units. So I think that there are models of how that worked that the employers built for the workforce.
And I think that concept is exactly what you're talking about, is for the mindset of the people who are making these decisions about affordable housing to understand at one time in our history that the people who actually had the industry provided the housing for the people.
Right.
And all the Quonset huts, the military, everything, it was like that. It wasn't all this in the taxpayer and it put on the
Correct.
community, that's all.
Correct, and that's still going on. I just got back from the Adirondacks, a small village in the Adirondacks, which has got some new enterprises, and the owners of those enterprises are supplying affordable housing for the workers. And it's how it works in those communities. Otherwise, they're not going to have any workers. It's that relationship between worker and employer. I think at the same time, the town can provide some guidance as to how that's done so the housing fits into the community. So that could be rehab of spaces that are no longer viable for commercial or industrial use, and we have a lot of those spaces. There are other ways to do it, obviously.
It would be interesting to partner with the university. The universities, I don't know if we worked on this or not, but there's a product of real estate that certain developers specialize in terms of creating housing for university employees. And I think we might have talked about this when I was chasing the mill project, but because university employees often fit within this affordable workforce housing category in terms of their income levels, having complexes that are built specifically for making sure that they have a place to live, because they are our number one employer in town. Do we still have formal communications with the university? There used to be a committee established to address all types of different things that concern the town and the university.
Yeah, they used to have what they called regular town and gown meetings. I am not sure how regular those are. I do believe they still happen. I have attended some meetings over the course of the last year on housing issues with the University of Rhode Island. Everybody looks at them as the cause of all our problems, or a lot of our problems. And that may to some extent be true, but they are now experiencing the same problems that the rest of the town is, in that their students are taking up housing that could be used for their employees, which is causing problems for them. South County Hospital has the same problem. You hire people, they come, there may be nothing on the market in the first place, and half of what is on the market is over $1 million. It's very hard to hire people in that kind of market. And you're correct, a lot of the university jobs are not high-paying jobs. A lot of it's graduate students and entry-level professors, and it's not a way to get rich.
Can I say something to that I do know that's happening is that, well, if I'm repeating something you know already, that they are building dorms, and it's going to be a requirement, freshmen and sophomore have to live on campus. And it's very active right now. They're going for I believe, they're going for the second. Have you heard about this? About the, that the university is building housing to require freshmen, sophomore. Is that second sophomore, then junior? Yeah. And they have to stay on campus. And I was talking to Representative Tansey and a couple of those representatives, and they're working closely because they know what's happening here is in Narragansett and now in South Kingstown. Graduate students, they're just, it's, the opportunity you're talking about for the workforce or anybody else, maybe the people in the hospital, students are now, taking over that. But they're trying to work with the town. Have you heard about this? No? Okay, it's happening right now.
So I'm aware of a couple of different things going on with housing at URI. URI has announced a partnership with Gilbane to build both new dorms and to demolish and replace some of their existing dorms.
That's right.
The net will be an increase of about 750 beds over the entire project. And while we have not seen an actual application come in yet, the planning department has been approached by a number of private dorm development companies about off-campus dormitory construction, which if you've been to other colleges, that's the predominant way in which they are housing students now. If you go to stores, it's all around the campus, and it's all off-site, privately managed housing.
So my experience with that was the demolition of buildings in Providence near Brown, housing really nice 19th century houses demolished for these types of development that Brian's just described. So one of the things I wanted to tell you about my meeting with Peter was that we talked about Kingston Village and the historic district that we are responsible for, and how that originated as a reaction to URI encroachment and threats for demolition in the 1950s. And how it is actually converted. It was more single family then, but now it's largely rental units. Students as well as probably faculty. I don't think we really know the makeup of who is renting the units, but there are quite a few units in Kingston. And through the design review that this commission has done over the decades since 1958 or 59, that appearance of Kingston has remained stable and historic. There's a lot of integrity, architectural integrity in the buildings. So it's a case example of how you can put quote unquote affordable, because I think most of that housing is affordable or low rent, how you can actually have historic buildings rehabbed. And these were 18th century, early 19th century, mid 19th century residential buildings rehabbed for, excuse me, for affordable housing, and, in a seamless way, actually. So, people are afraid of just the whole term of historic preservation, not realizing sort of the value, the fact of the matter of how it works. And I think, East Greenwich is another example of that in the Hill and Harbor District, down by the water, and on Main Street as well. And I think Bettina knows more about that than I do. But it's kind of, if you look at historic main streets, you're going to find the same thing. You're going to find more of a mix maybe on some of the main streets that have revived successfully. But many of them have. I think one of the biggest things, though, with employer and employee housing is when we create the incentives for affordable housing, there gives and takes. It's a quid pro quo kind of situation in a community. You want to have the housing for the workforce, but after you make all these concessions or you change things, you want, once you've created it, you sort of want to keep it. You don't want it to go on and become, because you're putting a lot of energy into it from a design point of view, from a livability point of view, from a community point of view. We want this housing to be fabulous housing, actually, And so once you make it that way, you do not want it to convert to, market rate housing in a short period of time. So we also talked about that 30-year thing. Why is it 30 years goes by in a heartbeat? I mean, I think we're all of the age to know. It's like, remember? 30 years goes by. That's only 3 decades, right? And then if it flips out of, it's like the length of a mortgage. If it flips out of the affordability range in 30 years, I don't think you've accomplished a thing. I think you just made more work for yourself. So that business has to be thought through very carefully. And that's one of the things that I think other communities have tried to deal with. Is it a long-term proposition? The employer, with his housing, is only thinking in probably a 30-year range. He's probably not thinking 100 years. I don't think the Hazards may have thought that their housing that they build would remain affordable. They wanted to create very valuable housing for their workers, and they did so. So I think with the affordable housing going into the future, when you create these marvelous rehabs in historic neighborhoods, you want that not to be gentrification. You want it to be retained as affordable housing. I think in the past, when we've had rehabs of neighborhoods in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C., and elsewhere that have been, really you've heard about them, read about them in national magazines. Boston, the idea is that the historic preservation has gentrified the community. These wealthy people have come in, bought these dwelling units that are, marginal or small, rehabbed them, and created $1 million houses out of them. That's probably not what we want to do with affordable housing. We want to do the opposite. We want to retain those values as affordable values and put some public money into it so that there's an opportunity for a developer to do that. Public money meaning foundation money or, state and federal money. So those are the things that have to be talked about, and the stigma of gentrification has to be removed from that discussion. You can't say that Kingston Village is a gentrified community. It's not. And it's a good example of a affordable place, more or less.
Bettina, all of this discussion was our attempt as a committee to interact with yet another committee, town committee, the Affordable Housing Committee. It's kind of been one of our goals, if unstated goals, to interact with other committees and coordinate, because that doesn't necessarily happen very often, or at least in my experience, it hasn't happened very often. In fact, I think it is a stated goal in in the comprehensive plan for us to be able to work with those other committees. Any thoughts or questions as it relates to affordable housing?
I think it's very interesting, and I obviously have done a lot of work in East Greenwich. And I think the Harbor District has become very gentrified and very expensive, I don't think they've retained, what it is we seem to be looking for. But I think that's a really good project. I think a lot of the mill housing that I've seen has been sold as condos, and they're beautiful, and, and including the one in the Harbor District, in East Greenwich. But I look around and I love the stone buildings that are in Peacedale, and I love that whole, and a lot of that now, from what I'm understanding, is a lot of office space. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think the town did a master plan for the owner, or with the owner, a number of years ago. This is going back more than a decade. And I don't know if housing was really part of that plan. Although I've heard there are some housing units in the mill, just hearsay. But what a wonderful opportunity it would be for housing, especially in the big building that is on 108 as it snakes around and goes over where the dam and the bridge is. It goes by it, because that building has views up Saugatucket Pond. Like half a mile up the pond, so from its upper levels.
Unfortunately, it becomes part of the river whenever there's a large flood, which is why it's not housing today.
I really think that could be spectacular,
Yeah.
that whole area. And, and the little village of Peacedale has such great potential,
Right.
I think. By maintaining affordable housing in the area. I mean, those stone buildings, they're just incredible.
So I think that this opportunity is really kind of a cool opportunity to talk more with the Housing Authority about specific things that could be done to help the property owners, to help residents within these communities that already have been fixing up their houses and put a lot of energy into them, who may have done that, as an affordable kind of alternative living arrangement for themselves, but should be involved in the conversation. And then there's, the other communities. I did run into a member of the Sustainability Committee, and there's some interest on their part in talking to us as well. So that might be something in the future that we could follow up on.
One thing I would question too is, where does the town come into play in terms of the zoning and all of that? Because there's been some beautiful pieces right on Main Street, but I do believe you have to be in compliance with what the town, the restrictions.
A lot of the zoning on Main Street, at least up the hill towards Dale Carlia Corner, that's commercial downtown, which requires a commercial component of the building, mixed use. So some component of the first floor needs to be retained as commercial. And I think in the past, we've required the entire first floor, but we've sort of been retreating from that, and we're really sort of focusing on the first floor that faces the street to keep that commercial character there. But if you have space in the back on the first floor, we will look at that as additional housing.
Okay, I might suggest that we move on to the very good discussion. Thank you for starting that off, Rich. Move on to the next item of business, which is new business, and the discussion of the Route 138 improvement project. I think this was a request by David Hill, who's no longer on the committee, but he had asked for this item to be part of our discussion. Brian, I think you've included some information on the project. It looks like there was a letter that was sent by Luke Murray. The letterhead, by the way, says school committee. I'm not sure if that was correct. But information that was sent to DOT in regards to the town's desire to see some modifications to the design, or perhaps adherence to the original design that was created.
So, I mean, David's request was fairly timely, because I think immediately after the last meeting, we had a large Zoom meeting with DOT about this project and it going forward. The memo that I included in your materials from June 16th was the town's response to that. And if you scroll through that, you'll note on page 2, section 2, items I, J, and K all talk about areas within the Kingston Historic District. And then scrolling down to page 3, items 4F and 5C also reference the Kingston Historic District. I think everybody has heard this except for Bettina. The Route 138 project started out as a very grand overhaul of the whole corridor from the Route 2 circle all the way through to the Morrisfield Kingston Road light. DOT Director Alviti has pared this way back to the point where now it's predominantly just a cut and repave of the asphalt, some restriping, and signal improvements and sidewalk improvements. I think that's the bulk of what's going to be going on. I did provide, let's see if I can put this up on the screen quickly. So you can see the color coding, starting at Route 2, all the yellow is going to be bike lane improvements with an added sidewalk from the park in West Kingston to the neighborhoods in West Kingston. Oops.
Point of clarification, you're saying that that's part of DOT's design, or that's what's being...
This is DOT's plan right now. Yeah, you can go ahead. I do have hard copies for everybody because I know it can be a little easier to look at that way. Once we get near the railroad right away, there's going to be reconstruction and improvements to the sidewalks. Eventually, it's a separate plan. It's not part of this, but the railroad bridge will also be being improved, and we are specifically asking that the sidewalk widths and everything be increased to allow easier pedestrian access to the Amtrak station. And again, you'll see that both new sidewalks and sidewalk repairs continue through to Plains Road. Again, new sidewalks, repaired sidewalks, bike lanes, and then getting into the area of Kingston. I think that the biggest issues are going to be the sidewalk improvements between Lower College Road and Upper College Road, because on the north side, that, if you're familiar with that sidewalk in front of the apartments there, it's very narrow and mostly buried under road debris and leaves and stuff most of the year and impassable. So hopefully that will be a positive improvement. And the sidewalks on the south side, especially between Little Rest and the church, are really in bad shape due to tree roots and whatnot. And there are a lot of people over in that area of Little Rest that walk to church up Route 138. I've heard from a number of people complaining about the state of the sidewalks over there. And then once you get into the main body of Kingston, east of Upper College Road, they will be repairing, resetting, and supplementing the existing brick sidewalks in there. So.
So do they have, I mean, this is just a letter of communication from the town? It's a letter of communication from the town to DOT. Has there been any response?
No, I'm not aware that there's been a response.
And we were told a while ago that there would be that we could not do this, that there was no way that you could participate in any kind of design changes.
So from what I've heard through the administration, and this dovetails with my understanding of the way Director Alviti operates at DOT, is that he has said that this is his plan. If the town is asking for substantial changes to his plan or wants to reopen public comment to his plan, he will shelve the plan and move on to another project,
My way to hell.
essentially, yes.
So there are state and federal funds being used for this work?
Yeah, my understanding is, I believe there may be some earmark funds involved in this.
So then the Rhode Island Historical Preservation Commission has commented on this, on the plan?
I don't know.
I think that would be something that I would like to see. So I'll make a motion that we write a letter requesting from the Preservation Commission what comments they have, what review has taken place on this project, and what comments have been issued.
There's a motion on the table.
I second.
Any discussion? Perhaps I'll ask, you said we write a letter. Did you want to be more specific? Are you asking Brian
That the
and staff?
Historic District Commission write a letter as a CLG. And we can explain that to you, Bettina. The town of South Kingstown is a certified local government under the National Park Service, receiving federal, state pass-through money for work, and we've just completed a project in Matunic with money, with a grant. So that condition or agreement allows us to communicate with the State Historical Preservation Commission and ask for advice, and they, on return, expect us to do our due diligence on project review and meeting all the obligations as a local historic preservation agency. So it's an obligation, it's a commitment, it's a contract, and under that we can ask them to provide us with this information about this project if we want.
So just the practicality of having the letter written, are you asking staff, are you asking Brian to write this based upon our inputs, or did you want to draft the letter?
I can certainly draft a letter.
I'm more than willing to work with anybody to put something together, but I would very much like if somebody could at least outline some bullet points, because I don't want to put myself in the place of speaking for the board. That's not my job.
Right. And that's why I think it's good if we put it together and let Ryan take care of it as a, just an implementer of sending it kind of thing, editing and sending it or whatever.
I have no problem helping to polish it and get it out the door.
Right.
Do you think the timelines allow for you to do this between now and next meeting, or did you want to just draft it and,
I think I have
Send
the
it
time
on.
to do it right away.
okay? Okay, so we have a motion on the table. We've got a first and a second. All in favor?
So just for clarification, are we preparing a draft and bringing it back to the board for review and approval, or are we authorizing Richard to work with me to prepare the letter and send it
The
in without any
latter.
further review?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay, just to be clear.
Yep. Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table? Say-
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Is there any other conversation as it relates to the project? Any other discussion, questions?
The only other question I have, which has to do with that 5C on page 17 of, I don't know, anyway, that's what I see here. It just is funny. It says Kingston Village, add pedestrian scale historic post-top LED lighting from Kingston Station Railroad Bridge to Liberty Lane.
I pointed that out to Luke. If you look at 5A, it looks like it's a cut and paste error.
Oh.
So I'm not sure if this got updated. If it was, I was not sent an update of the letter.
Right. So certainly within Kingston Village itself, I do not believe there are any periods, historic period streetlights. I don't remember any.
I think we've talked with this with David and the bicycle pedestrian people, and I don't believe there are.
Yeah. So this would, I think if we look at this loosely, number 2 says install conduit to handholds in the sidewalk areas to allow for future addition of these lights by the town as funding becomes available. There's that. I think that this seems to be, there's no design of a street light that's on the table to be reviewed and decided upon. Am I correct? Nobody's come up with an alternative design.
I have not seen any designs for street lighting, no.
I know there are people who would love to see the utilities put underground, but that's not in this. And I don't think I think that's a deal breaker altogether.
It probably is, and it's probably not something that would be wholly within DOT's authority to do that. It would also involve Rhode Island Energy, National Grid, cooperating in that effort as well.
Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move to the next item, which is staff update.
I don't think I have any updates for you guys this month. In terms of historic structures, I think everybody can see that the work on the Sheldon building is moving forward. So we're anticipating that and the related work to the old Phil's restaurant as well. I'm not aware of anything else that would impact this board's jurisdiction.
How about the progress for the RFPs for the three town properties, in particular the Watson House, which is the more historic of the three properties.
So the RFPs have not been issued. They were presented to the town council, and the town council wanted to see them polished a little bit more. There were talks about taking out some of the more prescriptive elements that were in the RFP in terms of design elements. They also wanted it to be run by the Affordable Housing Committee for input, and they will be looking at that tonight after your meeting.
Sorry, was the RFP specific to South Road School, or is it all for all three properties?
So thank you. The RFP that was going to go out the door first was specific to South Road. So we have not specifically worked on an RFP for the Watson Farm Estate at this point. I will say, however, that we are continuing to move forward with the design that was put forth by Union Studio, and all of those designs carved out the historic home on its own lot in hope that we can attract somebody who's interested in restoring that structure. I have not seen that be taken off the table. When you put something out for a request for proposals, though, you never know what's going to come back. So we'll have to see what happens there.
And in reference to, I don't know if there's any updates on this, to the Wakefield School, which Rich was very good to talk about the adjacent nature of the school property to the Saugatucket Park, which is part of the historic district. There were a number of recommendations that each board, I think, provided. I don't know if that went to the planning department or where that went. And one of the recommendations that I think we made, as well as the planning board made, was that the Wakefield School have more, as opposed to less, commercial in the balance of commercial versus residential. Do you know, was there any adjustments to that plan at the Wakefield School?
So the council was also interested in keeping a commercial element on that property. The difficulty is going to be the fact that commercial properties require a lot more parking infrastructure than do residential buildings. So depending on how much commercial and what kind of commercial, you know, you could, if you try and put a restaurant there, it will probably absorb all of the parking that people need to park in the apartments at night, and it won't be compatible. But if you put uses in there like an attorney's office or a daycare or something that is only active during the day when residents are out at work, now you can share parking resources. And I have also been advocating that Wakefield would be a good place to experiment possibly with a zero parking requirement. And you can do that either by simply saying, we're offering apartment unions, it doesn't come with parking. You either have to use the bus, use a bike, Zip car, Uber, whatever, or you offer people the choice of renting your apartment and paying extra for parking.
I wanted to add, too, that in my discussions with Peter Swain about that alternative, he was interested in the massing. If you remember, we talked about, when we reviewed it, the massing of the old Wakefield School that historically was there, burned down in the 1960s.
What were you saying, the massing?
The massing, the size of it, the scale of it. Massing-wise, it was a large, 3-story, I believe, shingled building with a roof. It didn't have a flat roof, it had a roof. I can't remember whether it was gambrel or gable or hipped. I think it was probably hipped roof. There are photos of it in the Wakefield book. That's the small pamphlet book. What's the press? Forgotten the name of it. I think Betty Cotter did the book on Wakefield. There's a whole series of these little booklets that have photographs. Yeah. Is it Acorn Press? Something like Acadia Press. Acadia Press.
Go to my Facebook site. I've been trying to school you folks on the value of my Facebook site for.
So
I actually gave the photos to Jeremy Lake from Union Studio, and at the last presentation with the council, he didn't show one, he showed two, but designed
Yes.
like the historic Wakefield Elementary School.
Thank you for doing that, Brian, because I felt when I read...
He loved that idea when I showed him the pictures. He thought that
and
was
I think
awesome.
we raised this, or I raised it at one of the hearings or one of the community hearings about the project. And so that's on the table. That all transferred into a design that's on the table. And I think Peter wanted to know more about that, and I explained it again to him that the park, this is Saugatucket Park, Bettina, in Wakefield, designed by the Olmsted brothers, which is the descendant firm from Frederick Law Olmsted, his children. And there's the picture of it. Yeah, it's 2.5 stories with that fabulous hipped roof. And it's right on the edge of the park. So it's basically where the school is now was that building. And the massing of the building was obviously, it was there before the park was designed. In fact, I don't want to get too off on this, but this is like early 1900s, like 1905 or so. The park is designed sort of after this is built and is not really put into commission until the 1930s. It's like a WPA project. But this building obviously was an edge to the park. In other words, like a barrier, and the park is an oval in front of it, or a bowl shape. So this really was the focus, in a sense, if you think about it architecturally. Just as an aside, I was going to say that the Olmsted brothers were also hired to do the playgrounds and the landscaping for this school, if you can believe it. That's amazing. And our Mr. Helm, Vernon Helm of Kingston, was responsible for all of that. He was the chair of the school committee when this was built.
There's a plaque there. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen the plaque.
Yeah, I'll have a photo.
So when we think about the affordable housing that could be built there, and this was what Brian conveyed to the designers, why not think about this as a massing for the new building that could be built there? And then you'd have the smaller buildings nearby or whatever else goes with it. So,
So the park was a bowl and playgrounds, and that was, the whole thing was
the,
designed for the school concept.
well, the school, architecture of the school was there as a background for I want to explain this clearly to you. The playgrounds were behind the school. And at the time, Olmsted brothers, and Frederick Law Olmsted himself, was very keen on saying, look, there are places for active playgrounds and active sports events, and there are places for passive adult parks. So this area had the active school children's playground behind that school, not visible from the adult strolling park that's now the bowl on the west side of the school. So the east side of the school had the active playground near the bike path, and the west side had this beautiful adult strolling park. And that's sort of, the design intent. Now, the playgrounds don't really exist anymore. They're sort of, it's different now because the school is surrounded by asphalt where those playgrounds were. And the school sprawls out because it's flat, and it has a bigger footprint than this building had, I think. My brother actually went to this school before it burned.
Okay, so along those lines, and this is like, how do you know about the playgrounds behind the school with the intent of the
Olmsted's, because there are plans for it, and it's documented in letters. It's all at the Library of Congress.
Okay, so this to me. I'm sorry. Forgot. This to me would be a great subject for a lecture to the library, get people in so they could, we've got to teach, I think, the history of this town.
Yes.
And so I knew it was an Olmsted Park. And by the way, Atlanta, I have roots in Atlanta, and their park is Olmsted. But
Yeah.
I think it's earlier than this. Okay?
Yes.
So I knew it was Olmsted Park, which I think it should have retained the name. That'll never happen. But the community that lives here now does not know any of this. And I think there are people very interested in it. And maybe through the Narragansett Historical, somebody, somewhere, us or whatever, has got to teach this or offer it to the community. And I know there are people, like you said, Betty Cotter, I know there are people who are interested in this. And this would be a big step in the direction of trying to make our committee and what we do valuable, I think.
Right. Well, I think that's really on the table probably for, how do we make something like that happen? Do we ask another nonprofit to do it, or do we offer somehow to do it ourselves, or how do we do it?
Can we do that ourselves? Can we do like a lecture series, or have a teaching at the Peacedale Library about this, or is it something that we could do, or?
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, I think that's definitely something that needs to be done.
One thing is, maybe we could take advantage of Ollie and do a tour of, put it on a tour. Do the history, learn the facts, and then, schedule a tour and have people go through it, because they're very, the Ollie group really picks up a great deal. And the more people walk through something, the more they appreciate it.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, anything else on staff update and planning department activities before we move to the next item?
The last thing I would mention is that the proposed interior renovations at the library continue to move forward. Final design plans were delivered from the architects to HPHC for their final thumbs up on it, so that continues to move forward.
Okay, that brings us to the reoccurring discussion topics and the planning for the 250th U.S. anniversary. Sharon has been our point on that conversation.
The only thing I have to report is the concept of the new monument next to the historical monument, which we talked about. And
This is located at Wakefield School?
no, this is at the Hazard School.
The Hazard School, that's, yeah.
And we're trying to get the concept of putting a monument there. Christian Burney he's going to be the authority on this, by the way, and he has identified more people and is still going, working with students at the University of Rhode Island, maybe possibly as maybe possibly as research helpers. And so we're in that stage right now of fundraising, and we've gotten a $16,000 commitment from the legislative grants. And also, there's some people that are very excited about this in the legislature that want to hold some fundraisers. So I had brought up that you all looked at that, and that your suggestion was we add another bronze on there, but we already talked about that can't be done. And so that's where we are now. And what I want to ask you guys, do you have to, we've got the design, do you have to go through some sort of a process where you have people come and bid and all that? Is there anything you have to do like that? Because the town anointed it and said, yeah, let's go, they're ready to do it, but do we have to then go through another process? You were there, weren't you, when they gave the blessing?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if it depends on the size of the acquisition, whether or not there is a bid requirement.
Well, this is not being paid for by the town. This is all coming from our non-town money.
So that would be a better question for the town's lawyers than
You asked the
than it is
town
for
lawyers,
me.
okay.
Yeah.
Is this an open meeting that we're having?
All of our meetings are open meetings, yes.
So we go by the rules of the open meeting, what's called OMA?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you post your notes on the Secretary of State's website?
Yeah, the agendas get posted
Yeah.
and the minutes
And we
eventually
we're
get
required to have a
posted.
quorum, according to that?
Yeah, we have a quorum. We have
No,
four.
I know, but I mean, isn't that a requirement of an open meeting? I have the checklist.
Yeah.
And ad hoc committees also.
The state has a very broad definition of what constitutes a public body.
They've got it right, I've got it right here.
Yes.
Okay. I was just asking you that.
Okay.
Anything else? Anything else on the 250th?
No, I think that's where we are right now. I was going to ask this, how you all felt about that. I do know all requirements have to come through the school committee because they actually maintain the property. And what I would ask for somebody who has I would think there'd be a requirement where that is located aesthetically is somebody who's into design, where that should sit, because it's supposed to sit somewhere in proximity to that. There has to be some tree lifting, but it seems like there's got to be some artistic or someone who's into design like this to say, well, I think it should be right here because that's aesthetically, like what you do. Don't you think?
Well, I think it may need a landscape architect to,
Landscape,
yeah,
okay.
to
That's who
weigh
does
in on
that.
it. And
That's Luke has got a degree in that.
yeah, I mean, I think he would have some sensitivity to it. I think it does require a sensitive, because there is a very important, I really agree with this, by the way. I think this is a really important thing to do, and it needs to be done really well. And it's a moment of expressing, because we're celebrating lives that were lost and lives that were devoted to, when you think about it, these were enslaved people who participated in the revolution and were quite astounding in terms of their bravery and what they went through. So they really should be celebrated. It also has all these other facets of it. It recognizes that indeed this town had an enslaved population, and the story about enslavement in South Kingstown. We're talking about, at the time, Narragansett was part of South Kingstown. So we're talking about a large area.
Plantations.
And the plantations and this owning up to this history, which has been swept under the carpet for so many years. And so I love the idea that you've expressed in your proposal that there's a research component that brings this clarity to what happened. And I've done some research myself, and it's fascinating what was going on in the town. There are scholars in the town that can help you and us with that information. Joanne Mellish is one of them. So is Geek, I guess it's pronounced Geek or Geek? Mr. Geek?
Joanne Melch.
Joanne Mellish.
Yes, oh, I know who you're talking about, yes.
So we have the scholarship right here to, and there's scholarship elsewhere. Keith Stokes is also very interested in this, and I think he has a new position in as a state historian or something like that, state historian. So the whole notion that we could celebrate African Americans and Africans in this way is very important. So not only having them on a monument, but knowing who those people actually were, and that's part of the research component, and tracking them as to where they actually lived. Because some of those dwellings may still exist, maybe not exactly where they lived, but the plantation owners' property where they were enslaved.
That's the part would be good, yes.
And then the distinction between, whether they were second-generation African Americans or were they actually Africans who were brought over. It's one of the distinctions that I noticed in the list of names from my own research. You have some African names, Bacchus, but Quaco, or there's some African day names showing up. Mingo might be one of them in that list.
It is.
Bacchus may be, and Prince may actually be Anglo names that are put onto an African. But when you get to, an Anglo name that's more Anglo, like John or Jacob or whatever, that may be a second generation, a young,
Right.
So
We can delve into that more.
we can delve into that
And
more.
we do have the indigenous population are also involved in this.
Yeah.
And so the woman who's got, what is it, she co-authored that book with Geek, Lauren
Spear.
Spears is involved in this. And so they're going to do a blessing, they're going to be involved in this also. So this is not just African, it's both. So it's just, that's all I'll say, because, it's time to move on, but I'd love to,
The notion of slavery in this town, though, is
Oh,
looms in this. So, I think that moving forward is good.
okay.
Okay, that comes to our final agenda item, which is future agenda items. I'd like for us to consider putting back on the agenda the voting for the committee leadership, now that we've got a set quorum.
I'd like to put on the agenda training for our new members. I don't know if we've had any training with the guide, any of the, our Kingston Historic District Homeowners Guidebook. I don't know if you have downloaded it, if you've received a copy. I think we need training on what this.
I think we need a lot of
Says.
training.
So there's mandatory training at the state level, but there's also training that we can do as well.
Okay.
Any other proposed agenda items for our next meeting?
Yeah, I'd like to continue with the coordination with the,
Yeah, it's
Portable?
a recurring topic. for
that's a
the two-
recurring,
yeah.
oh, okay.
Anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn. Is there one?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We've got a second from Bettina. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Have a good night.